Of all the mysterious enigmas in Cyberpunk 2077, none are quite as poignant as Mr. Blue Eyes. A character who crops up time and again throughout the game, usually secretly, sometimes not so secretly, and appears tied to an organization with immense power and resources. Aside from direct encounters with Mr. B though, there's also events throughout the game which link him to other plots and characters around Night City that draw together this ginormous underlying plot involving mind control, AI, space, and so much more. In this mammoth of a video, I'll be tying together all of these subtly connected secrets and plot threads to paint a picture of the grand, unified Mr. Blue Eyes conspiracy. There's a number of entry points from which we can jump into this theory, but I think the best place to start is with Dream On. The first quest will likely play, which Mr. Blue Eyes is definitively tied to and even shows up in. The second of the two Parallels quests, in which we're hired to resolve for them a personal matter of security in their home, where Jefferson recalls discovering an intruder during the night, shooting at him, and subsequently waking up to find no evidence that the event ever happened. His security detail, SSI, attempt to convince him the whole thing was a bad dream, immediately making them sound a little sus, and encouraging Jefferson to call in V, who's already proven themselves in semi-solving the murder of Mayor Lucius Rhine. I did a recent video delving further into that very mystery, which can provide you with some additional context to this, but the main takeaway, the prime suspect of that murder, I think, is again Mr. Blue Eyes, and by extension Night Corp, with the discoveries made during this quest merely serving to strengthen that thesis. For starters, the terminals in the not-secret downstairs security office go over the general makeup of the SSI security team, who operate in three separate groups. Orange are the only members actually known by the Parallels to be operating on site, wandering around doing general security stuff as cover, but more importantly, serving as a smokescreen for teams Blue and Black. Team Blue operates in the secret upstairs security room, hidden away behind the TV and apparently erased from the Parallels' memory, a room that we'll discover one way or another after rummaging around, and one that's housing some extremely advanced, unfamiliar tech. Now, the particular circuitry on the main scannable computer really reminds me of the same circuitry found on a particularly enigmatic statue. So maybe there's a connection there, but at this point in the video at least, let's just stay focused on this quest. Team Blue are the on-site secret operatives, and they're using this computer's tech to rewrite the minds of mayoral candidate Jefferson Parallels and his wife. The data from this operation is then fed to a dish on the roof and beamed to a surveillance van nearby. That appears to be the domain of Team Black, who then presumably managed to relay the info back to whatever this overall outfit is. We can find a ton of examples for these mind overwrites during the quest itself. Elizabeth mistakenly refers to blue roses that they had at their wedding, despite the photo on her bedside table, which she no doubt sees at the start and end of every day, displaying the roses as a common red. For Jefferson himself, there's an email correspondence on his laptop which chronicles him firing his marketing campaigner, Leah Patel, feeling her ideas compromise his integrity, only to rehire her days later, having forgotten he ever let her go in the first place. Basically, he didn't like her ideas for ads and thought shooting a gun at a stack of legislation went against the dignity and respect he sought to convey. At the same time, Leah's intention was to grab the attention of an audience hooked on trashy, sensationalized TV, providing them with something they want to see and can resonate with. Speaking of which, let me quickly tell you about a product that I hope you'll resonate with that's kept my neurons functioning whilst I piece together this crazy conspiracy. Gamer Supps provide energy supplements whose names and designs fit pretty much perfectly with the Night City aesthetic. Though in real life, drinking from one of their waifu cups in public is liable to score a bit more attention from passers-by. More importantly though, for me at least, is the existence of their melon flavor, which tastes exactly like those watermelon sweets. You know the ones. Use the link in the description or pinned comment to check it out, and apply the code SAMBRAM for 10% off. Back to the video though, and clearly the controlling third party, who want Jeff in power, care more about election results than Jefferson's own sense of personal pride, reversing his dignified decision to ensure him better chances of winning the election. Evidently, this team and this organization take the idea of being a puppet master to a whole new level. And even when the Paralyses incorporate an outside party like us into the mix, SSI take the matter very seriously, and even directly advise Jefferson against it. Because the more the Paralyses' personal life is isolated, the less independent variables in the mix, the easier they are to control. Having scoured the apartment for clues then, the next task is to head down to the streets and tail the spy van, hoping for it to lead to even more clues about this shady operation. Unfortunately, it instead leads us straight to Northside into a group of hired maelstromers. But this isn't without its own clues. Firstly, the very fact that this group chose to hire Maelstrom out of everyone ties in with several more associations this outfit appears to have with the gang, all to be discussed in later chapters. Second, a note to one of the Maelstromers suggests they've been hired to blow this van to smithereens, destroying any damning evidence now that we're onto them. Reaching here, the operatives will swiftly head to the roof and make off in a camouflaged AV. My game did glitch for this to reveal it to be a trauma team vehicle, but I think that's more a case of reused assets rather than any kind of clue. After all, the AV isn't supposed to have any definitive texture. It also doesn't lead anywhere if we jump on top, so no threads to follow in that sense. However, dropping the operatives before they reach the AV, we can recover an encrypted shard, revealing that this whole project with the Paralyses was codenamed Condon, and that now, after our breach of security, is going to have to be shut down. Internal teams Orange and Blue were withdrawn, and the orders for Team Black to flee was sent from on high. Should they fail to escape though, in order to prevent capture, they will also be remotely terminated. Clearly, this organization values secrecy over the lives of its operatives. Scanning the van, we can see all the info that was being beamed back. Full dossier reports on both the Paralyses, including their neuroglycopenic symptoms like mild disorientation and severe memory loss, triggered by the implanted memories. We also see that the Paralyses aren't the only candidates of this operation, though perhaps they're soon to be the most influential. However, at least 6 others have been targeted by this. None of the names are recognizable, nor do I think they come up elsewhere around NC. And I think this was more done merely to allude to there being a wider operation. The only one, possibly, that we may already have heard of is Liberty Patel, since remember, the Paralyses' marketing advertiser was named Leah Patel, possibly short for Liberty, and maybe her relevant marketing ideas aren't actually hers after all. It would make sense, but take that one with a pinch of salt. No sooner than we've seen this though, this sort of 4-pronged symbol appears and wipes the data. A lot of netrunners have these, and they're almost like a calling card for the runner in question. Spider Murphy has a spider, and Alt has this kind of pentagram surrounded by 16 points. This one though is a mystery. The messier center parts remind me a little of the Blackwall texture, whilst the arrows and prongs point in all directions, emanating out from this central point. Presumably, it's the insignia of Mr. Blue Eyes or someone associated with him, but for now, we'll just have to wait and see if it comes up in future games. But if you guys have any theories as to the design in the meantime, then please comment them below. After this though, we meet with Elizabeth, who finally admits to being aware of this conspiracy. But after the outfit in control contacted her, threatening that Jefferson will have an accident if she pursues it further, she plays ball, for fear of her husband and their daughter's safety. Their daughter, who lives over in Europe, but even still, the enigmaticness of this organization makes their resources appear near unlimited. I think there's few who would dare pick a fight with a foe that seems very powerful, but just how much so isn't entirely clear. So Elizabeth tells Jefferson that the whole thing was just his basic rival Weldon Holt's doing, and begs us not to share anything further. As we travel over to Jefferson, we then receive a call, also from them.
It doesn't matter what you tell him. It doesn't matter what you think of doing or do. You can't change anything.
What?
We know who you are. We know what you are. We know what you want. You are playing with fire. Don't dare cross the line.
Now, Mr. Blue Eyes may be insinuating to have so much power that our actions don't matter here, but this clearly isn't the case. And I think this whole segment demonstrates something of a weakness on his part. For starters, he attends this meeting in person, watching from literally just the overlook across from us, well within earshot of what's going on. Also, the very content of the phone call kind of serves to disprove the points made. If it doesn't matter what we tell him, if Jefferson is going to forget this whole encounter, then why why call us at all? Why tip us off further to the organization's existence if they can just erase all memory of this? I mean, clearly, their memory implanting tech is powerful, but it's evidently much easier to implant false memories on unsuspecting victims. But should we tell Jefferson the truth in this scenario, we leave him with one prevailing and overwhelming thought: trust no one and question everything, shattering his life of blissful ignorance, being guided into power by those who seek to use him, and encouraging him to resist at every turn. So does it actually matter what we tell him? Yes. Fast forward to the end of the game quick, and we can see Jefferson does win the election either way, but wins it by a much bigger landslide when we incite him to resist what's happening. Quick spoiler warning for those who haven't finished Phantom Liberty, but jump to the tower ending 2 years later, and we can read on the Mayor of Night City website that Jefferson implemented polar opposite policies dependent on if we told him the truth or not. And I think telling him just encourages Jefferson to do the exact opposite of whatever he's possibly feeling inclined to do. And I don't know which is worse, having your values and ideals slowly overwritten without realizing, or living constantly with crippling paranoia, questioning everyone around you and even your own thoughts. But whilst the Peralez quest is the most prominent example of this happening in-game, and clearly important enough to Mr. Blue Eye's organization for him to make an appearance in person, it's not the only time we encounter tell of technology like this. And now it's time to go and recover the databank of Netrunner Sandra Dorset. Yes, this conspiracy ties all the way back to one of the first quests we play in the game, rescuing Sandra Dorset after she's kidnapped by scabs. However, a while after this, Sandra will text us again, requesting additional aid. Turns out her databank was stolen by the scabs as well, and she desperately needs it back. We can find it during the last login gig, and though she requests we don't hack open the information inside, doing so is crucial to tying this conspiracy together, and links us directly to Night Corp and their secret operation known as Carpe Noctem, which is Latin for seize the night. And in this context, it wouldn't be unfair to assume an association with Night City. I've talked about Night Corp before in videos like this one, if you want even more details, but to summarize real quick. Night City was founded in the 1990s by a man named Richard Knight with a vision to create the perfect city on Earth. Of course, that very much isn't the case by 2077, nor was it ever the case, really. Richard Knight was killed in 1998, and his noble work was continued by his wife Miriam, still with the dream of one day making Night City the epitome of perfection. She started the Night Foundation, which eventually became Night Corp, operating with the simple goal of making Night City a better place. Publicly, they're well known for buying out the N-Cart system in 2068 after poison gas was released into the tunnels and brought the original organization to bankruptcy. By 2080, they plan to have built an entire travel system direct to the city of Chicago. But behind the scenes, in 2077, the ultimate vision of a perfect city is still very much alive. Only now, they're employing far more sinister methods, bringing us back to Sandra's databank, stolen direct from Night Corp and disclosing info on Operation Carpe Noctem, essentially incorporating an AI capable of bypassing security systems to hack into people's hardware and tamper with their very thoughts. In its early stages, Night Corp conducted the experiment on their own employees, focusing mainly on a subject referred only to here as HK-13, using subliminal conditioning to transform them from someone calm and empathetic into displaying acute psychopathic behavior. The end result involved them strangling a colleague over coffee before jumping from a window on the 16th floor to their death. With the test ended, Night Corp mentions installing the AI onto the devices of their actual targets, a target whom I would assume is Jefferson Peralez, or perhaps first one of those names that show up in the van. But before we delve further, let's just go over one thing, because it's never actually definitively confirmed that the operations of Night Corp and Mr. Blue Eyes are indeed one and the same. And I've got to say, all of these presumptive associations going forward have to be taken with a small grain of salt, though I think the similarities between both operations are far too similar to not be part of the same outfit, at least in some sense. Of course, Mr. Blue Eyes specifically could could be part of a deeper, more secretive operation tied to Night Corp, but might be very surprised if the two weren't interlinked, at least somewhat. For starters, the naming conventions for test subjects and staff members are very similar, reducing them to a basic series of numbers and letters. That convention then extends to the operations themselves, with Operation Condon seeming to follow on from the discoveries made in Operation Carpe Noctem, though most strong to this case, of course, is the use of the exact same methods of subliminal conditioning, surfacing thoughts within a subject's mind as though they'd always been their own. I mean, if the two aren't related, then that's simply to say that there's two shady, enigmatic organizations out there seeking dominion over Night City via the use of mind control of its powerful citizens and possibly eventually everyone else. And if that were the case, it'd make sense for one to eventually destroy, consume, or infiltrate the other. Elsewise, they just tread on each other's toes. Handing the databank back to Sandra and rummaging through her apartment at the same time then yields a little more insight into her adventures around the net. Discoveries that exist on the fringes of this conspiracy, but which are still very relevant with what else they refer to. I'm talking, of course, about the entries 36, 37, and 38. Sandra recalling her ventures possibly beyond the Blackwall into Night Corp systems and the discoveries she made. Firstly, despite visiting a certain area of the net maybe 20 odd times, Sandra discovered a previously uncharted section which had been concealing files within Night Corp's database. She mentioned she only had time to crack the ice of one file and gain full access to it, and presumably that was Carpe Noctem, which she then stored on her databank. But she also says, quote, "Each of them could be a puppet without realizing it. And those flights to the moon? What are they cooking up there? Was it human DNA, or I couldn't run a thorough scan?" End quote. That first bit, I presume, refers to the Night Corp employees being conditioned by their overlords, but the next part appears to imply some biological experiments taking place on the moon, possibly with human DNA, but that's not confirmed. And who knows, maybe this is setting up some interesting type of genetically altered enemy for Orion. We'll touch on this again later when we get to Mr. Blue Eye's seemingly direct involvement with the moon, but for now, these entries tail off by setting up Sandra's capture by the scavs, getting trailed by some shady-looking Russians on the way to work. We know from other gigs that when the scavengers kidnap someone, it's a lot more coordinated than simply grabbing them off the streets. Anyone with chrome worth stealing usually has a biomonitor, which when triggered alerts trauma team to their location. The scavs have to coordinate their attacks down to the second in order to block that signal in time. Sandra's abduction then wasn't random, and it's likely that the scavs were employed by Night Corp to remove this threat before it could do damage. Though I do wonder here why Maelstrom wasn't employed as usual. Perhaps they simply didn't want to head down to Kabuki, or maybe Night Corp didn't want Maelstrom specifically to get a hold of the databank. Either way, the key takeaways from this quest are that both Night Corp and Mr. Blue Eyes are definitely running similar experiments, and are likely one and the same. But also the fact that Night Corp have been shielding off entire parts of the net to hide their data. Which brings us to the next quest. The Bloody Ritual Cyberpsycho encounter was, I would say, the scariest mission of the entire game, until Phantom Liberty came along and blew that out the water, but still. And many of the scary elements of this mission actually factor directly into the lore surrounding this encounter. Only playable at night to accentuate the vibes of terror, stumbling across this scene, we first see a kind of pentagram, giant graffiti of the classic Maelstrom skull, with lines drawn across it marking 5 different points, near to which each has a lit up prong and a body of a dead Maelstromer. In the middle is a net running bath then, filled with blood and organs that have been specifically carved up just outside the circle. Something seriously twisted and cultish has happened here, and to be honest, it's very in keeping with the way Maelstrom operates. These guys aren't so much a gang in the traditional sense, but rather more a cult. Worshippers of all things chrome and tech-based, they constantly seek to improve upon the weakness of flesh and pursue otherworldly sensations only unlockable with cyber technologies. Hell, to get into the gang even involves undergoing an initiation ceremony, which usually means having your face cut open and replaced with the red glowing eyes, which don't have to be limited to 2. So all this to say that finding this scene with Maelstrom behind it isn't really a surprise, and initially one of the sacrificial victims are still alive, uttering these words.
Lilith has concealed the 10th circle from the ancestors' eyes.
Now, there's a lot to unpack with this quote, and this isn't the only time it comes up in-game. First of all, the 10th circle almost definitely is referring to the 9 circles of hell, a concept created by 14th century Italian writer Dante Alighieri, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, and presented in his divine comedy Inferno, which consists of 100 sections known as cantos. The 9 circles of hell go in a kind of best to worst order that starts at limbo, then goes to lust, then gluttony, greed, wrath or anger, heresy, violence, fraud, and finally, treachery. Basically, big proponents of each of these sins get cast down to their respective circle, but a 10th circle of hell could be a number of things, with I suppose the implication that it's full of even worse people than traitors. In the game, a preacher refers to Night City as Hell's 10th circle. This could fit, given the cesspool of evil people that reside within, the likes of Jotaro Shobo, Godfred Persson, and others, and in that case, the quote would be saying that Lilith has concealed Night City from the ancestors' eyes. Let's just roll with that for a second and investigate who Lilith might be, bringing us back to the ritual. This whole thing is essentially a cyberpunk version of a demonic summoning, using blood and chrome to channel an AI into the body of a sacrificial lamb, so to speak, who in this case is the cyber psycho in question, Zarya Hughes, whom we subsequently see climbing from the tub, but not before this happens. This heavy breathing isn't just to set the atmosphere here, but goes to show that somebody is messing with our sensory cyberware. Don't forget that in this world, our eyes have been replaced with Kiroshi implants, able to provide us with a constant heads-up display, optical zoom, and more. But, like any technology, our eyes can also now be hacked. And indeed, this version of Zarya, or perhaps now the AI made human, Lilith, is little more than an illusion, lulling us into a trap which no sooner have we entered do the pentagram lights transform into electrodes meant to subdue us, and Lilith herself is revealed to be off in the corner, poised for a surprise attack. We know a little more about the power of true AI from Phantom Liberty thanks to the Kanto Cyberdeck and Erebus SMG, both of which are capable of shutting down enemies instantaneously with horrific screams. And actually, with all this talk of Dante and the Circles of Hell, I believe it's no coincidence that the Kanto Cyberdeck is named after the sections of his works, also called cantos, insinuating perhaps that the 10th circle of hell could be the Blackwall. But if this Lilith has the same power as that, it begs the question why she simply doesn't shut us down, rather than engaging in Mantis Blade melee combat. The sentiment from Regina in the text afterwards are that Zarya couldn't handle it, and just went crazy, tearing into the surrounding maelstromers. Though personally, I'd wager these guys dying was all part of the ritual. Reading the shard on this maelstromer's body suggests a certain impatience to perform this, as well as a craving for blood and much talk of the abyss. Quote, "The abyss is impatient, the abyss is hungry." End quote. Again, I think the abyss must be referring to Lilith, though the concept of a digital AI being hungry for blood is an interesting one. I mean, why would such a being desperately crave such contact with physical humanity? And, well, a shard on Zarya does seem to expand on this further, which talks of blood combining with fiber optics in order to open the gates of the abyss, resulting in, quote, "Death within arm's reach, the metallic taste of his scythe on my tongue, I will tug at the tangled cables of fate. A hard reset, a blue screen, a brain reformatted." End quote. Okay, so maybe the abyss isn't exactly Lilith per se, but rather the location where Lilith resides, which again could only really be beyond the Blackwall. Though with Zarya reformatting her brain, Lilith will be made physical in her body. The combination of blood and fiber optics seeming to be a vital part of this. But again, why does Lilith even want a physical form? And was the ritual successful or not? Well, from the fact that she boasts the immensely powerful ability of rewriting what we can see in real time, I'm inclined to say yes. Something more powerful than your average netrunner is doing this. But at the same time, my guess would be that the ritual wasn't entirely a success. She isn't powerful enough to kill us on the spot, and I think certainly there's some issues thrown into the mix with an AI attempting to overwrite a biological brain. So back to the quotes about the 10th Circle, and I would theorize that rather than Night City, the 10th Circle of Hell is indeed actually the net, a place detached from the physical plane of reality and inhabited by evil demons. It definitely fits, and it goes with the rest of the quote as well, about it being concealed from the ancestors' eyes. Assuming that 10th Circle is the net, that would make the ancestors us humans, who are having it concealed from us by the Black Wall. The Black Wall itself is an AI whose job is to keep all the other AIs at bay from accessing the safer parts of the net, the subnets, which are like little safe havens or islands floating around in the ocean that is the net beyond the Black Wall. But if this were the truth, not saying it is, just that it's the only theory that seems to fit like a glove, that would make the AI Lilith the very same AI that is the Black Wall. And if that were the case, then what business would the Black Wall have seeking out a physical body for itself? This all brings us back to Mr. Blue Eyes and Night Corp again, who, as luck would have it, are of course mixed up in this. Don't worry, this chapter is definitely related to the title of the video. We already know that the Night Corp organization have some sort of deal going on with Maelstrom, and in this instance, I believe the whole bloody ritual was a more radical experiment that ties back to Operations Condin and Carpe Noctem. Once again, using AI to mess with somebody's mind, only much more aggressively this time. For proof that this is connected though, we'll need to get a little more chummy with Garry the Prophet, whose many insights, it turns out, bear a lot more weight than first appearances would suggest. So Garry the Prophet plants himself in a little alcove outside Misty's Esoterica, and coming here throughout the game, we can hear him spouting various nonsense, or seeming nonsense, which generally boils down to the fact that the world is secretly governed by vampires and the techno-necromancers of Alpha Centauri. In one of our first encounters with him, Garry preaches on the idea that corporate elites are using our Karoshi optics to spy on the world, insinuating that the stories of our lives are then converted into entertainment.
But who are those who follow our every step, you ask? Why, the titans of entertainment in Alpha Centauri! In their wretchedness, they placate their weary and oppressed masses by putting our laughter, our tears, on full display!
Also, incidentally, the plot of the Joan is Awful Black Mirror episode, though this game did actually come before that. Anyway, every time Garry mentions Alpha Centauri throughout these encounters, it tends to relate to a higher-up organization, an elusive corporation, or in this case, just a media outlet. We could say that there is indeed a race of overlords hiding in the next star system over, but rather, I think this is one of the many examples of Garry misinterpreting some transmission. You see, we later learn that the source of Garry's somewhat insightful knowledge comes from a coprocessor inside his head that his Ripperdoc presumably somehow acquired from this shady organization. This allows him to tap into some secret corporate channel, which just so happens to be, probably, without much doubt, the same corporation Mr. Blue Eyes is tied up with. So the Karoshi thing is insightful, but what he says next is arguably even more so.
I tell you now, Saburo is not gone from our world. He rests undisturbed in the family crypt. He feasts on the blood of his servants, awaiting his body's rejuvenation to return once more. Mark my words!
If you've played the devil ending to the game, then it doesn't take much retroactive deciphering to figure out that between the lines, Garry was absolutely correct here. Saburo had achieved some form of immortality and was resting in the family crypt, aka Mikoshi, patiently awaiting to return in the body of his son. Garry, of course, puts a supernatural spin on things, but the raw facts are there. And this knowledge could mean two things. Either Night Corp and Mr. Blue Eyes have infiltrated Arasaka so deeply as to be aware of these facts, relaying them across their organization for Garry to intercept, or Arasaka and Night Corp, or at least Mr. Blue Eyes' shadier division, are working in league with one another, and perhaps even shared some technology in order to crack open the science behind the relic in the first place. This could implicate that Mr. Blue Eyes' organization isn't exclusively a division of Night Corp, but rather could just be partnered with them when it comes to the sharing of mind control tech, say. And likewise, likewise could have a separate deal going on with Arasaka for the relic tech. Hell, what if Mr. Blue Eyes simply is an AI-run Illuminati-esque organization that's infiltrated every megacorp in the world, stealing the secrets of every major technology and relaying them across these hidden channels? Now, this is a theory that I really like, but it also feels highly speculative, so perhaps you guys can add some more to it. The dialogue that I'm trying to get to, though, which directly relates to the previous chapter, talks about the disembodied souls inhabiting the nets. If we pick this dialogue, asking Garry about hearing their voices, he'll say this.
You heard their voices? What did they say?
They spoke not in the language of mortals, no. They howled, screaming in agony, forever removed from their earthly form. Among them was a woman, her voice of ice, Queen Lilith. She was calm, but at the cost of her humanity. You ask, who opened these unholy gates of the abyss?
No one's asking.
And I answer you, the techno-necromancers of Alpha Centauri!
So, first of all, removed from their earthly form suggests that these entities were formerly human, meaning either A, he's referring to disembodied engrams inside Mikoshi, or B, that the AIs beyond the black wall aren't necessarily born in the net, but perhaps could all be former netrunners, warped beyond recognition into something completely new. Alt, for instance, is a definitive example of this. The AI that we meet may merely be an echo of the woman that once was, but one was created from the other. Speaking of, that description of Queen Lilith could easily have Alt written all over it. An ever-calm AI with a voice of ice that's lost her humanity. Also, Queen Lilith? That implies she's ruling over something, and this could fit with Lilith being the Black Wall, presiding over the entire net and preventing anything from entering her kingdom. Or indeed, Queen Lilith could be the same AI used by Nightcorp to rewrite people's thoughts. The Queen will preside over humanity and keep them subdued. Are Lilith and Alt the same AI then? And does Alt seek to control humanity, absorbing Mikoshi in a bid to initially bolster her power? It's not entirely clear, to be honest. But if I were to bet, I'd say the thing I'm most certain of is that Queen Lilith is the Blackwall AI, given the whole concealing the 10th circle and the Queen bit. But whether she's more than that will just have to be left up to our speculation, at least for now. The final part of this then, the techno-necromancers opening the abyss, appears to refer directly to the cyberpsycho encounter with Lilith, with even the same thing of referring to the Black Wall as the abyss. This, incidentally, would make Maelstrom the techno-necromancers, a description which is certainly apt for them in both parts of that word. After all, Zarya/Lilith was killed, and brought back it seems, via the use of twisted techno-magic. Again, we don't know entirely the purpose of that experiment, but it seems almost to have been conducted in order to sate the hunger of a being from beyond the abyss, beyond the Black Wall. In another encounter we have with Garry, he refers directly to the blue-eyed people, but as far as he's concerned here, they are also a separately evolved race of intelligent reptilians that originated from the dinosaurs and hibernated for millions of years under the Antarctic ice sheet, now controlled by Alpha Centauri scientists to integrate with and infiltrate society. That one's basically a description of the Silurians from Doctor Who in that literal sense as well, but I think the implication to be taken away here is that there is another form of high intelligence that is distinctively non-human, mantled and utilized by corporate overlords to further control the world. We see absolutely no signs of reptilians in this game, save for the iguanas, but have already seen AI being used a whole bunch. And I think the main implication is that blue-eyed people, including our famous elusive man, are disguised AI walking amongst us in society. As for the whole ancientness, the Antarctic race, that's a bit more of a mystery. Now, there is a theory out there that the net and the entities lurking within already existed at a sort of different plane of reality, and rather than being fully created by humans along with the net, it was more discovered by them, and could even be a literal hell, which would fit right in with the 10th circle thing. It's a very cool theory, I like it very very much, but it does begin to cross into elements of the supernatural. We could draw connections here to the esoteric discoveries made in the FF06B5 mystery, but that would get way too off topic, and this video is already sitting at about 30 minutes thus far. So let's jump to Garry's next encounter. At this time, he's implying that the Nomad clans are werewolves after they were exposed to some kind of bioweapon, which warped their DNA to transform into beasts. Now, this one takes a little more digging into source material to learn about, but actually, it's not even much of an exaggeration. Wolfmen are actually a thing in Cyberpunk lore, though to be fair, they are referred to as modified wolves made to be more human-like, rather than modified nomads made to be more wolf-like. So perhaps Garry is referring to this legend, or maybe he's just referencing how nomad clans steal and salvage corpotech to bolster their own power, just like we do with the Basilisk tank. Either way, these passing nomads are a little offended, and saving Garry from them one way or another is how we learn about the coprocessor in his head. It also, though, unlocks the Prophet's song quest to attend a secret meeting that he heard about up in Northside. Heading there, we find this secret meeting not to be aliens, but rather techno-necromancers, i.e. Maelstrom, and two unknown but pretty decked out corpos referred to only as John and Jane Doe. There's something about these Maelstromers, though, that sets them slightly apart from the rest. That being, their optics have a pinkish tint, as opposed to the common deep red, with the only other time we see this being on the Maelstrom cultists during Bloody Ritual. Clearly, the group in particular responsible for raising Lilith are working directly with this shady corp. And if you want more clues, just listen to their conversation.
What says the Wolf Father to the Moon Mother as she descends to Earth?
I have protected the realm of man and shadow, but today they are protected by our children, whose name is Patricide.
In the age of his failure, he became lost in the forest.
Lilith has concealed the 10th circle from the ancestors' eyes.
Carpe noctem lamia.
Digit diem execrari.
There's quite a lot in there, though all of it seems hidden behind layers of coded messaging. And the first thing to consider here is that these words spoken are simply a security measure between the two parties to ensure all is as it should be and that the shard should be exchanged. But even if all of this doesn't have meaning, no doubt some of it does. For example, the exact same line about Lilith and the 10th circle comes up here. The rest, I suppose, can be interpreted across an entire scope of meanings, and really over-speculating on it won't necessarily lead us down any correct path to any of the answers. So I think the most important thing to establish with this is the fact that the ritualistic Maelstromers are in league with this corp. We can translate the final two lines they share though, from Latin, as that yields some interesting results. For starters, we have Carpe Noctem Lamia. Firstly, Carpe Noctem is the exact same name as Night Corp's mind control program, possibly, but not definitively, implying that this is a branch of Night Corp. Again, Carpe Noctem means seize the night, whilst Lamia has a number of Latin meanings but generally refers to a witch or a vampire known to suck children's blood. Now, who do we know to possess witch-like qualities that was desperately hungry for blood? Yes, Lilith, our demon from beyond the Black Wall. Indeed, I think this sentence is possibly a direct instruction to Lilith to seize the night. Incidentally, if Lilith were the mind controlling AI designed to subdue the populace, seize the night could be referring to seizing control of Night City. Equally, if we go off the basic Google Translate, we get a simple seize the night vampires. And assuming Garry has a basic Latin translation package installed, that could be exactly what he is hearing, explaining the origins of his obsessions with vampire elite. It could also lean then into the idea that these merely are code words, the meaning of which we're looking far too deep into, but we're going to keep doing that anyway. So the next sentence, Deced diem execrari, was a little harder to pin an exact translation, but assuming execrari means to curse, as in insult, detest, or abhor, and Deced diem means something like the day is due, or the day is suitable, then it implies a meaning something like the cursed day is due, or perhaps it is suitable for the day to be detested. Perhaps night, in this context, is the region Lilith desires control over, and by contrast, contrast, Day is the opposite of that, and something she utterly hates. Again, this could all just be code words to keep this secret meeting secret, and not fully decipherable by infiltrators like Garry the Prophet. But what do you guys think? Perhaps I'm reading way too much into these Latin sentences. Anyway, taking down these groups yields just one encrypted shard from John Doe, titled Destroy After Reading. At first glance, it appears somewhat nonsensical, but does mention, again, eyes, night, and puppets. Coincidence? Perhaps. But all of these things are big themes to this conspiracy, and dots which do, through these encounters, seem to connect. But the main message of this shard is actually once again hidden behind a cipher. If we take the first letter of each word and just combine those, we now get this: Project Oracle Command Execute Plans. Another secretive but named thing going on behind the scenes in Night City. Oracle generally refers to a wise entity, usually capable of divining the future. So perhaps Project Oracle is exactly that. A plan by Mr. Blue Eyes to somehow infer the decisions of the citizens of Night City and use this knowledge to strengthen his control over them. Not actually a very difficult thing to do on a mass scale. The YouTube algorithm works on this exact basis, monitoring your past viewing decisions and habits to infer the most likely content you want to consume next. The majority of you would have been brought to this video by a modern day equivalent of something we could fittingly call Project Oracle. But this is Cyberpunk, and plans such as this are rarely so benign. Taking what we already know about this organization's activities, I think it more likely that they would seek control not by interpreting thoughts, but rather by planting them, just as they did with one of the Night Corp employees and later Jefferson Morales. The exact nature of Project Oracle is something we can only really speculate on, but another interesting thing of note to this is how Maelstrom are the ones passing the message to the Corpos. Now, one would assume that Maelstrom are employed by them, and thus it should be the other way around. It's incredibly interesting to theorize then where these Maelstromers got their orders from, and I'm gonna go out on a limb here and suggest that maybe they got it from Lilith, the same AI this particular pink-tinted branch appear to have been in contact with and created a whole ritual for. It would solidify her status as a queen, and again suggest that she, via the chromed-up Maelstromers, is strategizing and relaying commands from within the nets, from beyond the Black Wall. I know I've already theorized that she is herself the Black Wall, and who knows, maybe it's kind of both at the same time. We, after all, see the net represented as a physical space in-game, and AIs as individual entities, but that's not entirely the case really at all. Just the way it's presented for our meager human brains to understand. So whatever Lilith is, she clearly needs Maelstrom to communicate, and perhaps her bid to acquire a physical body stems from a desire to execute her plans far more easily, becoming the proxy as opposed to requiring proxies. It could also be the case though that Mr. Blue Eyes is Lilith's proxy, though that would then defeat the object of this ritual and the whole meeting somewhat. But we'll discuss more Mr. Blue Eyes in a little bit. Returning to Garry, we of course learn that he's gone, taken away by them. He knew too much. He sent us to a top secret meeting which we then royally messed up. Like I said in Dream On, this organization seems fairly all-knowing and omnipotent due to their elusiveness, but they're certainly not invincible and can have plans scuppered by unexpected occurrences. So according to Garry's remaining disciple, known as Bum, Garry was carried away in an AV, the same way Team Black, who were spying on the Paralyses, attempted to get away. We can then show Bum our shard, which somehow she actually recognizes and seems terrified by, before sharing some incredibly interesting insights.
This had happened. They here to bend us to their will, to make us their puppets.
Whoa, calm down. Who is? The Techno-Necromancers?
And lo, they shall descend upon the earth unseen, the sky shrouded in darkness. That's what he said. Night's coming, the eternal night.
Okay, so not only has she pretty much summed up the goals of Operations Carpe Noctem, Condin, and possibly Project Oracle, but she also seems aware of all the darkness night imagery. And the mention of nights coming and eternal nights, I can't help but wonder if this is in reference not to night time, but rather Richard Knight, the founder of Night City, returned at last in digital form to see through his vision of the perfect city on Earth, presiding over it now eternally and forever. But yes, I know, Richard Knight died before engram technology was invented, so for this to work, someone would have to manufacture an AI from scratch that's simply instilled with the man's ideals. Or it could just be referring to his wife, Miriam Knight, who's already done so much in establishing the groundwork for Knight Corp to continue her husband's work. Who knows, maybe Lilith is the engram of Miriam Knight, with the sole goal, even in death, of creating the city her husband wanted. Climbing out of that rabbit hole though, to speak with Johnny at the end of the quest, he at least reaffirms the notion that the supernatural bits of this whole quest are simply embellishments of truths with a more corporate origin. But to top this quest off, here's one more thing which may very well be a glitch, but I have managed to make happen multiple times upon returning to her in different saves, and it seems a repeatable occurrence that always happens at the exact same moment.
Alpha Centauri agents kidnapped!
Yeah, could just be that she's not despawning from the area properly, but if this is genuinely a feature, then it can only mean one of two things. Either A, the organization behind Mr. Blue Eyes literally has the power now to blip troublesome individuals from existence, like Thanos, and if this is the case, it pretty much opens the floodgates to godlike entities and other dimensions, the likes of which we only otherwise see alluded to during the FF06B5 Easter egg, where Polyhista similarly vanishes from existence. But to keep it more simple and grounded in the internal narrative reality of Cyberpunk, for this video at least, the second option is once again tampering with our Kiroshi optics, something we already saw when fighting Lilith, and granted that came with more glitches and roars, but still, with Project Oracle, whatever it is, activated by this point, maybe now they have the power to hide certain people from view for everyone, displaying a false reality free from resistance and questioning to keep people complacent to the core narrative presented by them. After all, from the moment we tell Jefferson what's happening to him, Mr. Blue Eyes can't actually rein him back under full control. And it seems the most effective way for the Corp to eliminate resistance to their brainwashing is to make sure nobody ever suspects they're being brainwashed in the first place. So possibly just to glitch this again, but I think that's a much cooler alternative to speculate on. Speculation over though, it's time we got back to the title character of this video. So the next time that we'll chronologically see Mr. Blue Eyes is during the ending path of Phantom Liberty, where we side with Somi. In this event, she manages to procure herself a flight to the moon to escape Rosalind Myers, but guess who it is that shows up to offer that for her?
Who got you this flight?
Funny thing is, I don't know. Proxy showed up. A corpo everyman for the ages. Expensive, understated suit, dark hair, blue eyes. He asked me questions. The kind only I know the answers to.
Blackwall. That the issue?
And other things. Rather not talk about it.
From this encounter alone, it sounds as though Somi's passage to the moon was effectively bought in exchange for the secrets she knew about breaking through the Blackwall and possibly what's beyond it. Information for a ticket off Earth. This would align again with Mr. Blue Eye's interest in the Blackwall, and maybe after the botched attempt to give Lilith physical form, Blue Eye's organization simply needs to up their Blackwall infiltrating game. Again, it's unclear if they're working in service to Lilith or want to summon Lilith into service for them. As for Mr. B's interest in Somi though, this clearly stems beyond the secrets he acquired from her. And for the second time in the game, Mr. Blue Eyes shows up in person to oversee our operation in secret through the spaceport. We can spot him twice here, first by looking up from this maintenance area, though he'll disappear before we can climb up to him, and a second time at the end, as we're boarding the monorail to the rocket, he can be seen for a split second standing there holding an umbrella. killer. And the fact he made it to here, mere moments after we unleashed a chaotic amount of Blackwall power on everyone in the vicinity, speaks volumes to his fearlessness and enigmatic power. Evidently, he wants to ensure Somi reaches the moon successfully, and I wouldn't necessarily say it's down to upholding any obligation. We already know from reading Sandra's files earlier that Night Corp maintain a presence on the moon, cooking up some kind of altered human DNA. Songbird is more machine now than woman, but her ever-present connection to the Blackwall makes her an invaluable asset, one that President Rosalind Myers is willing to start a war to reclaim. And no doubt delivering her instead to the moon sent her straight to Night Corp's science division up there. Whether their intentions for her are more benign than Rosalind's aren't entirely clear, but given their track record of removing free will, eliminating troublesome individuals, and summoning artificial demons via ice baths of sacrificial human remains, I'll go out on a limb and say maybe Somi's prospects aren't as bright with this ending as we first believed. Who knows, maybe her level of chrome and pre-existing Blackwall connections actually make her a genuinely suitable candidate to house Lilith. The actions of Mr. Blue Eyes in this part of the game especially really remind me of the Elusive Man from Mass Effect, a similar-ish character who also has a lot of resources and I guess noble, though very twisted goals. And so, with this video sitting around the 40-minute mark at this point, it's time for us to finally meet the man one-to-one, which we'll do at the end of the Sun or Don't Fear the Reaper ending paths, when, similar to what happened with Somi, he appears, almost like the devil, with an offer of salvation at our utmost end of need. This encounter, arguably, is the one that teaches us most about Mr. Blue Eyes the Man, so let's go through line by line.
V. I've long awaited this moment, to look the latest afterlife legend in the eye. I must say, I'm moved.
So clearly Mr. B is clued in on the goings-on around the afterlife, long awaiting this meet, yet not notifying us about the times he was watching from only several feet away. Also, latest afterlife legend would suggest that Mr. B knows his history on previous Night City legends, and maybe has even worked with others in the past.
Well, V. Mikoshi was quite the punch. You TKO'd Arasaka, in fact. Brought you eddies, influence around town. But not just that. It meant positive paralysis of Arasaka's systems. A few additional hatches opened up. My people rushed in, grabbed what they could.
So this bit confirms a few things. We discussed earlier whether Mr. Blue Eyes wasn't definitively part of Night Corp, but rather worked with many corporations, trading intel and resources. Though the fact that his people took advantage of our attack and rushed in to grab Arasaka intel suggests that if there is any partnership, it was one that prevented full access to Arasaka intel until now.
I have confirmed the intel leaking out of Arasaka. The casino is currently testing a new security system. And it's true. They will be shutting it down briefly today. I believe you'll know how to use that moment.
Again, Mr. B isn't all-powerful yet, but clearly aspires to be, and gaining access to the Crystal Palace is a major power move, what with the most powerful people in the world tending to frequent it.
Having second thoughts? Hope that doesn't mean you want to drop out.
Drop out? At this stage? No. It would make no sense. I'd take a hit. Speaking of which, nobody's ever pulled off a stunt like this. Where I'm from, they'd say it's straight impossible. They'd say you're taking too big a risk. Poetically speaking, flying towards the sun to burn up.
Notice how matter-of-fact this guy talks, straight to the point, just businesslike, perhaps, but where I'm from, they'd say it's straight impossible. Either he's from a risk management bureau, or he's not from this world, but rather one of data and statistics. Maybe a digital risk management bureau. It's not conclusive evidence that Mr. B is a proxy controlled by an AI, but it certainly leans more into it.
Self-confidence worthy of a legend. Or of someone risking it all. But I sense you know what it's like to lose everything. To fight for one last breath. I see it in you.
This time tomorrow should have the casino's client data. All of it. Don't forget your side of the bargain.
Oh, I never forget a promise. Good luck.
That last bit, "I never forget a promise," makes me wonder for a second if he really was just making sure Somi made it to the moon okay, back in Killing Moon. Indeed, when you meet the guy in person, he does give off a kind of calmness and charm. A bit sleazy, yes, but by no means necessarily evil feeling, which contrasts massively with the maelstrom, or the suited silent types, we've been dealing with through the video. If Mr. Blue Eyes is the guy sent in when the organization need a genuine person to talk to someone, then they've absolutely nailed it, with the right demeanor to present to people. And to be fair, Mr. P does stay on comms right up to the point before we jump out into space from our shuttle. Supportive presence indeed. And I mentioned in previous videos, but I'll say it again here, there's some colloquialisms that he uses which feel definitively human.
That's kind of grim. Then again, who am I to judge?
Making me wonder if the man is still in control, using his own voice and words, but rather just having blue eyes because he's relaying the commands of somebody higher up, somebody unseen. There's also an email from Victor right at the end of the game that shows V did inquire as to Mr. Blue Eye's identity, but Victor, unsurprisingly, learns absolutely nothing, theorizing that Mr. Blue Eyes is either a corporate identity so high up that nobody can get info on him, or is just a shady dude who stays out of the spotlight. And I'd wager it's a bit of both, but given his resources, intel, and the promise of a way to save V, as well as of course all the shady but very advanced tech we've seen showcased throughout the video, it's clear that Mr. Blue Eyes is insanely well connected. There's also a second message here with a rundown of V's objectives in the Crystal Palace, but that's something we never get to experience. Overall, my guess with this whole operation is that Night Corp, or whoever they really are, seek to expand on Operation Condon. Controlling the mayor of Night City is one thing, but controlling most of the world's leaders and celebrities is another thing entirely. Pulling their data from the Crystal Palace, of course, doesn't automatically grant the ability to rewrite their thoughts, but it does provide a ton more info on how best to approach that with each individual. Addresses, habits, home security measures, useful stuff like that. After all, it's not like they can easily force everybody with an ounce of power to hire SSI. And perhaps their likely murder of Mayor Ryan, discussed in this video, was partially done to frighten and encourage Jefferson down that route. After all, the Peraleses do mention tightening their security at the end of that first quest, which could have led them right into Mr. B's clutches. But we're beginning to stray off topic from this chapter, and before attempting to piece together everything discussed in this video into a simple, cohesive, best guess conspiracy, there's a couple more loose ends, theories discussed over the years, which we also had better investigate. So the first thing that people have picked up on before now is this little aspect of the game files themselves, where Mr. Blue Eye's hair mesh is labelled as Morgan Blackhand, though that's the only part of him to have that name. The body mesh is still just labelled Mr. Blue Eyes. Now, we could take this to mean that Mr. Blue Eyes is in fact Morgan Blackhand, who hasn't been seen since 2023, after the Arasaka Tower bombing. Immediately though, I see one glaring issue with this, that being the distinctive lack of a Blackhand cyberarm. Not an utter deal breaker, he could have gone undercover with this alias, and we know that cyber parts can be covered up with fully convincing synth skin, though there's also, however, the small issue of Blackhand's entire character being worlds apart from this corpo-suited elusive man. Blackhand, rather, is a solo of solos, who, much like Batman, likes to capture his targets alive. So the only eventuality in which I can imagine Blackhand would become this is if somebody is simply using his body as a proxy, and otherwise has full control, which to be fair is exactly how Somi refers to him, as a proxy, and fits with the whole constant blue eyes thing. But let me draw your attention to something that goes against this. The 2018 cinematic trailer for this game features Mr. Blue Eyes twice, once sat in a meeting and again on a plane, seemingly having caused the death of the guy sat across from him. Only in this case, the blue eyes aren't present, suggesting the guy is acting of his own volition. If this is Morgan Blackhand, hand, then the killing part and general demeanor don't really match his MO at all, suggesting even more strongly that it's not him. But then again, we do have to call into question the actual canonicity of this trailer, given it released the same year as the E3 gameplay demo, which wasn't an entirely accurate representation of the game. Plus, the trailer they released after this in 2019 is basically an alternative cinematic of the events post-heist, which does definitively contradict the canon events of the finished story. So I don't think we can necessarily take Mr. Blue Eyes without the eyes here as something that necessarily happened. So could Mr. B be the body of Morgan Blackhand controlled by Night Corp or Lilith? I mean, yeah, in theory, but assuming all of this from the name of a hair file that could just be a long abandoned remnant from early development, it's not exactly strong evidence for anything. So not entirely off the table that he could turn out to be a brainwashed Morgan Blackhand in the next game, but I really wouldn't count on it. One other thing people have called attention to over the years are the rings worn by numerous NPCs around Night City, including Mr. Blue Eyes, Jefferson Peralez, some of the monks near the FF06B5 statue, Garry the Prophet, and all manner of other random NPCs around the place. It's believed that those wearing these rings might be in on the conspiracy, so to speak, or at any rate, part of it. Those doing the controlling, those being controlled, or those just in the know, who for some reason all then opt to wear these rings, engraved with JG in fancy lettering. But I think there's a far more simple solution to this one, and I'm sorry, but it's really not that exciting. See, JG probably just stands for the top-line fashion brand Jinguji, and is merely worn by NPCs as little more than a fashion asset. For proof of this, we need look no further than Jinguji's own store clerk, Zane Jagger, who is sporting one of these on each hand, no doubt to just show off the product. Maybe there's a question as to why Garry is wearing one, and who knows, maybe he had a little more cash before he went crazy and kept the ring from his old life. Either way, these things are just way too numerous across the city for my liking to have any definitive wider meaning. I'm not saying necessarily that they don't, but there's far stronger leads to pursue with this, and I do think the rings are just probably a Jinguji product. So with all of that looked at, every thread from this loosely connected conspiracy underpinning vast parts of Cyberpunk 2077, let's try to tie those threads together, wild theories aside now, into a cohesive understanding of what Mr. Blue Eyes is doing behind the scenes. I think it's pretty clear that Mr. Blue Eyes, or whoever is pulling his strings, wants control above all else. Maybe of the world, but definitely of Night City. At the same time, they want their presence and level of control to remain a complete secret, going to great lengths and utilizing insane gaslighting techniques such as with the Paralysis and Project Condon to ensure nobody suspects their activities. Starting from the top then, controlling the decisions of their key decision makers, likely to implement legislation that will further benefit their aims. But at a guess, I'd say their end goal is total control of everyone, influencing their thoughts on such a level as to warp them into drones, all working towards the collective greater goods. More like an ant's nest than a people city. But who would sit at the epicenter of this carefully conditioned regime? Why, of course, the Queen Ant, or rather Queen Lilith, who I think possibly was formerly human, and thus would explain her craving to feel blood course through silicon, to be part of the real world once again, even if only fleetingly. An ice-cold demon stripped of her humanity that for some reason desires Night City to be conditioned to her will. Maybe she's the Blackwall, maybe she's Alt, or maybe she's the engram of Miriam Knight, still attempting to implement her husband's vision of the perfect city, transforming it from visions of a hellscape into a utopian haven of perfection, concealing the 10th circle of hell from our eyes, rewiring brain chemistry on a mass scale to ensure a place free of violence, inequality, and people not operating to their full potential, subtly inducing them to work harder and be better. More for the good of the city, mind you, not necessarily the individual, but at the same time, if you could open your door and not get shot, go to your job happy and motivated, would that necessarily be a worse thing than what Night City citizens have now? Though if their early testing has sent a Night Corp employee out the window and truly wrecked the memories of the Paralysis, then it's clear this reality is still a ways off, and God knows how many will suffer on the journey to achieve it, or even to continue enforcing it. Still, you do have to ask that were it fully successful, then would being subtly controlled by the AI overlords in a utopian society be preferable to how things are now? Personally, the loss of free will and probably memories is a bit of a deal breaker for me, though the safety, prosperity, and maybe improved focus at work is somewhat appealing. Though, to be fair, a solution to that focus part that doesn't involve removing free will, at least as far as I can tell, is just called caffeine. Again, go check out Gamer Subs through my link down below. Gamer Subs. I think possibly a bigger problem with this whole mind control for the greater good thing is Lilith, because having an AI overlord who frequents bathing in human blood, merging it with her silicon in a bid to feel something, may be a little problematic when it comes to maintaining this peaceful new world order. Back to Mr. Blue Eyes himself though, and it's clear that he is simply the human point of contact for this much wider scheme. An easily named target to pin as the core of this mystery, but realistically, Nightcorp, Lilith, and the Techno-Necromancers / Maelstrom are as much a part of this whole thing as he is, and any one of them could equally be the head of this operation. I'm gonna wager that given Garry refers to her as Queen Lilith, that this whole operation might just be her idea, and not Mr. Blue Eyes, unless they're the same person. Lilith, who could in fact be also Alt Cunningham, but then again might not be, and I'm gonna need another video to investigate Alt fully and entertain that notion a little further. But I think the identity of Mr. Blue Eyes then is not necessarily a mystery we're supposed to solve, at least not in this game. Nor is that the question sitting at the center of this mystery at all, but rather the conspiracy to turn people's data and cyberware against them, using it to obtain total, invasive, yet unseen control, eventually over untold masses. That's more the real story here. And that story, I think, is the real core of the grand unified Mr. Blue Eyes conspiracy. Thank you for watching. This has been one of the biggest mystery videos I've ever worked on, and whilst I've tried to touch on every important clue found in the game, I am just one guy with way too many hours in Cyberpunk, so if you have anything to add that I might have missed, then please do comment it below. Thank you, as always, to the patrons for going the extra mile to support this channel, and giving me the freedom to take the time I need to fully research bigger videos like this one. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. I'm Sam Bram, and have, of your very own independent free will, an absolutely Nova Day, Chooms.